This episode is brought to you by Vital Farms. Isn't it bullshit to have to question where your food comes from? At Vital Farms, you can trace your pasture-raised eggs all the way back to the source, the pasture. On the side of each pasture-raised carton of eggs, you'll find the name of the farm where your eggs were laid. And when you look the farm up on their website, you'll get a peek at all the sunshine, fresh air, and open space the hens enjoy. Learn more and find out where to buy them at vitalfarms.com. Vital Farms, keeping it bullshit-free.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Rick Davis about common gaps in leadership training and common leadership struggles in organizations.
Rick Davis, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the chance to chat with you about leadership today, the gaps in leadership, particularly in leadership training, and the types of struggles that commonly manifest themselves in organizations in relation to leadership. So that's really what we'll be exploring together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Rick's bio with all the listeners. Rick Davis is a retired battalion chief from the Loveland Fire Rescue Authority in Colorado. He was in the fire service for 37 years, including volunteer and military firefighting, and 29 and a half years with Loveland Fire. During his 14 and a half years as a battalion chief, Rick served as a shift commander, also the department's training chief. Rick is the owner of Impact Us, cultivating today's leaders, providing leadership speaking, training, and coaching services. He is a member of the John Maxwell team and authored The Furnace of Leadership Development, How to Mold Integrity and Character in Today's World. Rick has a BS in Business Administration, an MS in Executive Fire Service Leadership, and is a graduate of the National Fire Academy's 4-year Executive Fire Officer Program. Rick is a veteran of both the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Marine Corps. Such a cool background. I'm so thrilled to have a chance to talk with you and explore these topics in general, but also, specifically in relation to your background and experience in fire and rescue. That's just really, really neat.
Okay, yeah, it's been a varied background for sure.
Yeah. Any other anything else you'd like to share in terms of your background or framing for this episode?
Sure. During my time here with Loveland Fire Rescue as a battalion chief, I had the opportunity, to run several programs. I ran our hazardous materials program, our special operations team, and one of the most enjoyable that I had nearly 7.5 years was our wildland firefighting program, which provided a number of different opportunities to build relationships beyond the organization and see different leadership styles across a wide spectrum beyond just local government, but including state government and also the federal government, because they're so heavily involved in wildland firefighting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I have some close friends that have a similar background to you. You perhaps might even know them, so maybe offline we can chat about that. But it's a really really neat background, and the crucible of leadership. As you're dealing with fire and rescue, and this is where like the rubber meets the road of just the nitty gritty hard work that has to be done, where lives are on the line, and leading people in that environment, I think. Is a challenge, and training leaders and training the other firefighters is a huge challenge. So So it'll be great to have a chance to talk about all of that. So with your experience as a trainer within fire and rescue and your work as a battalion chief, what are some of the biggest gaps in leadership training that you've seen over your 30 years?
I'll split it out into, the wildland arena, then municipal firefighting, and then I'll add in the military as well. Because although firefighting, fire is the same, through all three of those realms, the approach to leadership is absolutely different. I'll start with the military first. When an individual joins the military, as an enlisted person, they are shipped off to, one of the boot camps and, immediately, introduced, to leadership principles and concepts. And, sometimes, when they get out in the field, it can be good, it can be bad. Jumping over into the wildland arena, the National Wildfire Coordination Group, they have a standard curriculum for people who are entering, the firefighting world. And part of that does include initial leadership training. And then as a person, progresses, through the various positions, that leadership training, gets elevated. Now we enter the municipal firefighting service, and it can be all over the place. Although the National Fire Protection Association has, written standards for, fire officers, there are many organizations that do not teach any leadership to their people until it's time for them to step into a supervisory position. And unfortunately, our organization was like that, for years. And it got changed in 2009 when we had a fire chief that came in here who saw the value in leadership training and what we needed to do. I've always been an advocate that leadership training should start, just like in the military or in the wildland arena, right out the gate. Don't wait and bring somebody into a fire academy. You teach them all the technical aspects of the job, send them on out, to a fire station, and then, they progress through their career, and they might progress up to be, a driver. And then one day they say, hey, I'm interested in being a lieutenant or a captain. And somebody goes, well, you know what? I guess we better give you some leadership training. So there could be a gap in there that needs to be filled. Here in the state of Colorado, when someone decides to progress up to those officer ranks, there's levels called Fire Officer 1 and Fire Officer 2. There is some leadership training that is provided then. But I see the gaps, Jonathan, leading up to that and then following after that. And one of the things that's associated with the gap when it tries to get filled is, we draw from many times the same family, meaning the fire service. So we get a constant diet of, firefighters talking to firefighters, and there's not an outside perspective, which now creates another gap.
Yeah, thank you. And I completely agree that we should be talking about leadership principles from day one with everybody. Now, we recognizing not everyone will end up progressing into formal leadership roles, but everyone will have the opportunity to lead others in some capacity, even if it's in more informal ways. And so having at least the baseline understanding of the core principles, even if it's just for self-leadership, for self-mastery, those sorts of issues. I think it's really important that we talk about leadership early and often with everyone. And of course, if someone takes on a formal role, then there's going to be more preparation. There's going to be more training. You can have leadership development programs that are targeted towards, particular subsets of individuals that are high potential individuals. But that doesn't mean that we don't provide leadership training for everybody, so that everyone can really benefit and leverage their own capacity to a greater extent. And I think, especially in the military and the fires and rescue arenas, I just think so many of those leadership principles are going to be so key given the nature of the work that is being performed. So I completely agree there, and I appreciate you pointing out some of those types of gaps. Something else that I've thought a lot about in terms of leadership gaps is that, in my experience, a lot of it, and this isn't, specifically in the military or in fire and rescue, but generally speaking, when I'm thinking about leaders and organizations and where the gaps might exist, so many leaders in formal roles, they arrive at that position due to their technical expertise at the lower level. So perhaps they were an excellent salesperson, or they were an excellent coder, or they were, a really great person on the production line, or whatever. They have technical skills, they had capacity, they had capabilities, not necessarily any demonstrated leadership ability, but they were good at their job. So they were promoted, and now they're supervising, or they're managing, or they're leading people. And it's a different skill set altogether. And especially if they haven't been trained at all along the way, now they're in this new position, and they're really not sure what to do. And so they just end up mimicking what they've seen other people do in the past. Hopefully it's been good, but a lot of times they're going to be mimicking less than ideal types of behaviors, and sometimes quite dysfunctional or disruptive types of behaviors that aren't healthy for the organization or for their people. So we absolutely need to keep that in mind as we're selecting potential leaders in formal roles, providing more training up front, as you mentioned, absolutely, but being more cognizant of it's an entirely different skill set to be able to be technically good at a job versus to be effective at leading a team of people or a large group of people. The strategic thinking that's involved at that point, the ability to influence, the ability to effectively communicate and articulate core ideas, and to generate buy-in amongst a large group of people. These are all the types of skills that are needed, and frankly, a lot of leaders don't really have that, when they find themselves thrust into this new role. And I often think about the Peter Principle, which you're probably familiar with, but the Peter Principle stating that people are often promoted to their level of incompetence. So, we get promoted because we were good at our job, but eventually you get promoted to a level where you're not good at your job anymore. And so you end up, if you're not careful, you can end up with a lot of people in a lot of positions where they're not actually very good at that position. They'd be better if they were one rung lower, doing what they did really well in the previous role. So these are all the types of things I think we need to carefully consider, that organizational leaders need to carefully consider as they try to staff their organizations, they try to create leadership training to better prepare the people in their organizations.
Yeah, you not only hit the nail on the head, I would say you hit the railroad spike on the head and drove that into the ground. As I was listening to you, I was thinking back of many, many scenarios that I have witnessed, I have seen over the years. Start with what you're talking about, the technical and the tactical competence. As I was a battalion chief, for a little over 14 years, I would have people on my shift that I had absolutely no question whatsoever about their courage and their bravery and their ability to pull up in front of whatever emergency was unfolding before them. And they could very technically and tactically proficiently handle that calmly and coolly, no problem whatsoever. But then as I got to know them differently, them being in a supervisory role, it's like, when you look at emergency services and emergency response, and initially when we started out, we were working a 24-hour shift. And just last November, before I retired from the fire service, we went to a 48-hour shift. So when you look at whether a department is working 24 or 48 hours, and you break it down, let's remove the large cities, like Denver, FDNY, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. But even they have slower stations there too. When you break that time period down that you're on duty, emergency response only counts for a small portion of it. But we spend a lot of time with each other in the rigs. We're like pack animals, you know. You got to go to the grocery store. You don't send one person. Everybody piles into the rig and they go down. So you're locked up with people. So these same folks that I saw that were very, very good at the emergency scene, wow. Now when it came down to handling issues, you know, personnel issues in the fire station, you know, lots of times they were not equipped. You know, and sometimes what I saw too, Jonathan, is they would be afraid to ask. They were afraid that they would appear to be stupid, you know, that somebody would think less of them. And your comment too about their modeling, you know, that certainly applied to me, you know, as I was growing up through high school, coming into the military, you know, modeling a lot of, you know, leadership behavior that, you know, was, you know, very authoritarian, but, you know, an incorrect style. And so, yeah, there's just so much. And one other thing I'd like to add on this particular topic also, I ran our department's recruiting program for 3 years. And there's a lot of people out there that, you know, want to be firefighters. And I've seen, you know, a change, you know, after 9/11, you know, there were a lot of people, you know, that were motivated from a patriotism standpoint, and that's changed. But what I also have seen is a lot of people who are into the sports medicine, sports fitness, you know, they want to come into, you know, the job. What I would encourage our people to do, or anybody who is helping us on interview panels, is look beyond someone who just, I shouldn't say just, look beyond someone who wants to come on board as a firefighter. What is their future potential for the organization? Realizing you're 100% correct. There are some people, you know, they should only go so far, and it's a disaster when they go further. But let's look at people when we're interviewing and see what that long-term potential is for them, that we can draw that out of them. And what are they bringing into the organization? What are they bringing into the organization from a leadership perspective right out the gate? Not 5 or 10 years down the road, but the minute that they show up on day one of the recruit academy, what are they bringing and demonstrating?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's important to recognize that everyone has the chance to lead. So you don't have to be in a formal role. You don't have to be a battalion chief. You don't have to be, you know, a vice president or a team lead or a division director or whatever, and you know, whatever organization we're talking about. Everyone has the opportunity to influence and to demonstrate leadership capabilities. And so we want to help develop those capabilities in everybody. But there's also no shame in sticking to what you're good at, right? And so some people who just aren't going to probably ever grow into being a really great formal, like a leader in a formal role, that doesn't mean that they can't be awesome at their job. And you can help them develop their greatest potential within that sphere of their capabilities and grow and be fulfilled, and they can still have opportunities to lead just in less formal ways. And that's awesome. So we definitely want to promote that. And then also make sure that there's a clear succession planning and a pipeline of good leaders to move into the formal roles as well. I've often seen individuals who, you know, going back to people being promoted to levels where they're not capable anymore. And the Peter principle, you know, I've seen people who were so good at their jobs, and then they were promoted and they were so bad. And it was unfortunate for the organization, who suffered because they had poor leadership, but it was so unfortunate for that person because they were put in a position where they weren't going to be successful. So part of our job in developing leaders and in training leaders is to also help them understand that we want to leverage people's talents and capacities and capabilities, stretch people to the extent we can and help people grow, but also recognize where people's strengths lie, right? And leverage those strengths. And if that means that someone will spend 30 years and never be a battalion chief, that's okay. Like they can still have an amazing career and do a lot of good and help a lot of people and have a great influence on the organization. And that's totally fine. So I think if we can balance all these different elements in the mindset, then that will make for more healthy organizations. Instead, what often happens is people feel like a C-suite level set of executives, or even kind of lower middle management VP level type people, they see someone who's been loyal to the company, they see someone who's developed over time and had all these different roles, and they figure, well, they've been with us for 10 years, 20 years. They're ready for the next position. They're ready for the next level up. And they feel kind of this duty to this person, which frankly, I appreciate that they would have that kind of loyalty to their people, but they then promote them out of a sense of kind of duty and loyalty, as opposed to, are they actually good for the job? Are they actually capable? And instead of looking around and scanning the environment for the people in the organization or external to the organization that would actually really thrive in that role, they end up giving it to a person who, probably isn't going to be as good. And it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate to that person. It's an unfortunate situation for the organization. So balancing all of that is essential. Well, you've mentioned a lot of different areas where people might struggle in leadership within organizations. Another one that I thought maybe we could talk about for a minute is around the idea of developing trust. And I suspect within the, I never served in the military, but I suspect within the military, in combat types of situations or fire and rescue emergency services, these are, very challenging types of situations. People's anxieties are high. And I imagine in those types of situations, you have to rely so much on the trust that you've built and the relationships that you've built with your team. Otherwise, you can't really get through those really tough moments. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how leaders can develop that trust. Maybe any examples that you've seen where they didn't develop the trust and kind of detrimental, kind of negative consequences, or vice versa, where they did a fantastic job of developing that trust and it led to great outcomes.
Yeah, I want to add for your audience that during my time in the military, it was Cold War time, so I'm not a combat veteran, but the trust element, still came into play, in both branches of the military that I was in. Before I got into firefighting in the Air Force, I worked out on the flight line. And so there's a trust element there. I worked on the F-4E Phantom fighter jet. So there's a trust element there because there's two people that are going to strap their bodies into a great big hunk of metal, with a lot of, jet fuel and sometimes munitions. And so they're trusting, people many, many times, someone who's 18, 19, 20 years old, barely out of high school, that's working on that airplane. So that element of trust, starts there. But moving over into the fire service aspect, trust is a huge, huge deal because of the type of environment that, firefighters are working in. And it starts right out in the fire academy, watching, the recruit, how do they respond to stressful situations, not only physically out on the drill field, but academically in the classroom, because there's a big academic load that comes along, with preparing for it. And when they move along into live fire evolutions, how are they responding, with that? Now it's like, hey, graduation time, a big ceremony, fancy badges pinned, families show up and everything like that. But hey, the rubber meets the road, and how long does somebody go before they're confronted with that call? And that call could be different for various people. I remember a documentary after 9/11. There was a French film crew that was following a brand new firefighter around in FDNY. And for his first year, he had not been on any significant incident. His first significant incident was the towers. Uh, and so, that's certainly, stressful, traumatic. And our organization here in Loveland, I will say, was very welcoming to people. Unfortunately, there are some fire departments that are not that way. They don't treat people well, their first year. I can happily say we were not and are not, that way. You welcome people in, and encourage them. And when you're encouraging them and you're treating them like human beings, you're building that trust already in a non-emergency environment, getting to know them, tearing down those personal barriers. Hey, where do you come from? What's your background? What do you like to do on your time off? Things like that. What do we have in common? That relationship building. So now, hey, tones go off. You're piling onto the rigs. You're out the door. And what is it? Is it, a 65-year-old male who's in cardiac arrest? Is it someone who is climbing and they've fallen 100 feet into a mountainous area? Or is it a structure fire, with a report of somebody, trapped inside? It's critical to build that trust ahead of time and not say, well, I'm going to wait until we get on the big one to see if I can really trust you. Because I believe, Jonathan, that sends a message to people that there's a doubt in that officer's mind as to whether or not I'm going to perform. And I'll add in something here that applies to our previous conversation. I had coffee last week with an individual that I know. He works in another fire department. And he told me that when he had been promoted, his immediate supervisor said, I'm watching you. I got my eyes on you. And that rattled that guy's confidence. It rattled his confidence to the point that he was not successful. And ultimately, he stepped back down to the previous level. Just those words. So the words of encouragement that can, build people up and start laying down that foundation of trust. And it's like, all right, I know what they are capable of doing and that they can do this. And it's huge. I cannot overstate the value of building that trust beforehand, and then it plays out on the scene. And if somebody does get a little hesitant, when they're making a push into a building or, going off the edge on a rope, it's like, okay, these are some stressful, fearful circumstances. Don't belittle the person, pull them aside. Over my, time in the fire service, I've seen it in the past where, somebody's made a mistake or an error and oh boy, they're all over them. And all that does is just shatter them. That's not leadership at all.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those examples. Trust is so foundational to good leadership. And one of the best things we can do in preparing the next generation of leaders is modeling good, respectful, trusting relationships and developing those with them. And they'll be more inclined to do the same thing when they're in leadership roles, training them on how to be humble as a leader, how to build relationships and how to engender trust, how to show respect. These are the types of things that we need to do as we're working with people in any organization, probably particularly within fire and rescue in the military. Well, we're about out of time today, but before we close, I want to give listeners a chance to learn how to connect with you, so they can reach out to you if they need assistance or just to connect professionally and learn more about what you do.
They can connect with me through my telephone number, which is 970-290-3092. They can reach me on my email, info@impactus, IMPACTUS, impactusleadership.com. And that's also my website, www.impactusleadership.com. That's how they can reach out and contact me.
Excellent. Well, Rick, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
I really encourage listeners to reach out to Rick, get connected, find out what he can do for you and your organization. And I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, that you find meaning and purpose at work. And I hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.